One person, isolated, cut off, turned inward, is no true person. The connection in this way between triadology and anthropology, between our understanding of God, the Trinity, and our understanding of ourselves as human beings, underlies the creation story in Genesis 1. God says, Genesis 1:26, "Let us make humankind." There the Hebrew word is Adam, and the Greek is anthropos. "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness." Now, why does God speak here in the plural, saying us and our? Whatever the original intention of the Hebrew author of Genesis 1, Christian thinkers from the 2nd century onwards have been quick to see here a reference to the Holy Trinity. God says, "Let us make man," because we are to imagine the three persons of the Trinity taking counsel together before they create humankind. The making of the human person is a conciliar act, the shared work of the three members of the divine triad. And the image of God within us is therefore a distinctively Trinitarian image. Let us make man in our image. The plural there has a profound meaning. The words in the next verse of Genesis, in the creation story, extend and deepen this Trinitarian understanding of the image. It is written, "So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them," or him. "Male and female he created them." The divine Trinitarian image is given not to the man alone, nor to the woman alone, but to the two of them together. It comes to full realization in the between that unites them. Because God is social, because his being is a relational being, the divine image in human persons has an essentially social and relational expression. It is brought to fulfillment, that is to say, in the communion of marriage, which forms the primordial social bond between human beings, and which constitutes the foundation of all other forms of social relationship. Only within an interpersonal communion can the triune likeness be concretely substantiated. Those of us who do not in fact marry need to express our identity as persons in relationship through other types of community. For example, through our membership in a parish, in a monastery, or some form of lay community, and through our circle of friends. The relational character of the human person, according to the divine image, has been powerfully underlined by someone who is today largely forgotten, the Scottish philosopher John McMurray. Some 50 years ago he wrote a remarkable book called Persons in Relationship, a book that's been sadly neglected. As persons, says McMurray, we are what we are only in relation to other persons. The self exists only in dynamic relation to the other, he writes. The self is constituted by its relation to the other. It has its being in its relationship. In other words, paraphrasing McMurray, there is no true person unless there are at least two persons communicating with each other. To be human is to be dialogic. So McMurray concludes, since mutuality is constructive for the personal, it follows that I need you in order to be myself. Even though McMurray himself does not establish a connection here between personhood and the Trinity, this last sentence of his exactly sums up the anthropological consequences of Trinitarian belief. Because God is Trinity, I need you in order to be myself. Now, to illustrate the relational character of human nature, some Orthodox and Roman Catholic writers make a distinction between the individual and the person. On the one side, you have the individual, which in Greek is atomon. And there you think of the individual as an isolated unit, a figure to be counted in a census. And then you have on the other side the person, which in Greek is prosopon, meaning face, meaning the human being not isolated, but relating to other humans. So the individual signifies the human being as competitor, as rival, whereas the person signifies the human being as cooperator, co-worker in communion. Shut off from others, self-centered. Each of us is an individual, but not an authentic person. It is our relationships that make us personal. There can be one person only when there is the possibility of every person, when there is a shared world. Personhood in this way stands at the opposite extreme from individualism. It is exactly communion after the likeness of the Trinity that distinguishes the person from the individual. It is not the individual who is in the image of the Trinity, but only the person. Well, this distinction between individual and person is illuminating, and I've used it myself, and it's certainly used by other Orthodox, by people like Vladimir Lossky. But it needs to be employed with caution. There are some polarities in which, when we move from one pole to the other, we find that the first pole is not negated by the second, but assumed into it and reaffirmed. The individual person distinction is precisely such a polarity. When an individual develops into a prosopon, into a person in relationship, she or he does not thereby cease to be an individual. On the contrary, as we grow into authentic personhood, our individuality, our sense of possessing a distinct and unique identity, is not obliterated, but enhanced. In discovering our love for another, each of us becomes more genuinely ourself, in a way that we never were before. There cannot be a real relationship without the existence of two subjects that are to be related. If I have no sense of my value in God's sight, I shall not be able to relate to another. So we must have some sense of ourselves as distinct, as individual, even as unique, if we are to enter into a relationship with the other. Individuality then is not abolished by personhood, but it comes to its true fulfillment through the personhood relationship. As we've already said, how can there be an I and thou relationship unless there is an I as well as a thou? So if we're to employ this individual person polarity, it's essential to keep in view that the first term of this polarity, the individual, isn't cancelled out, but it's contained and enlarged by the second term, the person. Let's think a little about hell. Sartre said, "L'enfer c'est les autres." Hell is other people, and it often feels like that. But in fact, surely, Sartre is wrong. Hell is not other people. It is myself, cut off from the others, willfully refusing to relate, denying the Trinity. Either we love one another after the image of God the Trinity, or we condemn ourselves to the void. That is why Father Pavel Florensky stated in the phrase that I quoted just now, between the Trinity and hell there is no other choice. And that phrase is used by Vladimir Lossky also in his seminal work, The Mystical Theology of the Eastern Church. Without Trinitarian love, there is in the end a loss of all joy and all meaning. We cease to be truly human without the Trinity, without mutual love, and we become an unperson, what C.S. Lewis in his book Voyage to Venus calls an unman. Here then are some of the ways in which belief in the Trinity illuminates our vision of human personhood. In the words of St. Basil, who does not know that the human animal is tame and social, not solitary and wild? For nothing is so characteristic of our nature as to communicate with one another, to need one another, and to love our own kind. Why should this be the case? Because God is Trinity. Why is it that in the Lord's Prayer we say not me, but us, not my, but our? Because God is Trinity. Why is Cain's question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" so full of bitter pathos? Because God is Trinity. Why is it that, in the words of Dostoevsky's Starec Zosima, we are responsible for everyone and everything? Because God is Trinity. Why is it that not only at the Eucharist, but throughout the entire liturgy of human life, we offer in all things and for all things? Because God is Trinity. In this way, faith in God as Trinity, so far from being speculative and theoretical, can and should be an immediate and transfiguring influence upon the manner in which we live out our daily life. As Nikolai Fyodorov perceived, our social program is indeed nothing else but the Trinity. Belief in God who is three in one, whose characteristics are sharing and solidarity, has far-reaching practical implications for our Christian attitude towards politics, economics, and social action. And it is our task and our privilege to work out these consequences in full detail. Every form of community, the family, the school, the workplace, the local Eucharistic centre, the monastery, the city, the nation, has as its vocation, each according to its own modality, the vocation, yes, to become a living icon of the Holy Trinity. When as Christians we fight for justice and for human rights, for a compassionate and caring society, we are acting specifically in the name of the Trinity. Faith in the Trinitarian God, in the God of personal interrelationship and shared love, commits us to struggle with all our strength against poverty, exploitation, oppression, and disease. Our combat against these things is undertaken not merely on philanthropic and humanitarian grounds, but because of our belief in God the Trinity. Precisely because we believe that God is three in one, we cannot remain indifferent to any suffering by any member of the human race in any part of the world. Indeed, faith in a God of mutual love should lead us to feel a yet broader concern for the pain and suffering of animals as well as human beings. We die in each other's life, we live in each other's death.